Hello, this is Jack Spillane, and this is All Politics. We're going to do a little Christmas program today, and with me is my good friend, Father Kevin Harrington. Father Kevin is the pastor of St. Francis of Assisi Parish here in the West End of New Bedford, and he is also a member of the Board of Trustees of New Bedford Free Public Library. So, welcome to All Politics, Father.
Thank you, Jack. No politics, please.
No politics. This is just a Christmas program, and we're going to talk about Christmas and what Christmas means. So I thought we would just start, just down home. What does Christmas mean to you personally, Father?
Well, I grew up in New Bedford, and no one knew whether they were rich or poor or middle class, because the fact is, when you look under the tree, up until the first 9 years of my life, there was no television telling my parents what they should or should not buy. But my own experience was more the songs that kind of got me into the mood. And I didn't really appreciate the Mass because it was all in Latin, so I didn't know what was going on. And I went to a Catholic school, and they basically were so discipline-oriented, and I was such a difficult child to control. I was more afraid of being hit than I was about Santa Claus coming to town.
Yeah. You were a difficult child to control, Father?
Well, the fact is, I guess today they have drugs. AHDD or whatever. I didn't like being called any names, but I'm glad I wasn't, called some of those names that are used by the psychiatric community.
I should interrupt here and explain that our video equipment is rudimentary, so it requires us to speak up.
Oh, all right.
As if we're projecting with a...
All right, fine. Fine, I will not speak ill of Catholic schools now.
Okay. So Christmas was less commercial, perhaps, before television?
Not only that, I was just entering my teen years when I fell in love with Charlie Brown that Christmas. And they've been talking about the whole commercialization of it. And I'm 13 at the time, or 14, and I recognized then and there when Linus did the gospel reading of Luke, I said, my goodness, this is a cartoon, and they're doing religion on air. And then it occurred to me that the people who had money were making things the center of their life. And in my family, there was always this thing about you don't judge others because of what they have or what they don't have. And so Christmas was always some kind of idea. An idea, of course, that you didn't fully understand, but you knew it was something that went beyond buying things. Not that I didn't want something under the tree, but, I knew that other kids would come and they would say, I got this, and I got this, and I got this. Sometimes I lied, and I said, yeah, I got that too. But, my definition of Christmas really involves the family. And I think that's true of anybody's Christmas. And everybody's Christmas is such that their happiest Christmas is when they were a child, and they want to pass that on. So when you speak to people who come from other countries, you say, I was just with a fellow, Ken Hartnett, and his wife was there, and I said, tell me about Swiss and what they did for Christmas. And she lit right up, and of course they assimilated later on. So I'm sure the people who are listening and watching to this, they define Christmas according to something that their parents and grandparents did and the way it was passed down.
So you grew up in an Irish Catholic family?
Irish-Portuguese, oddly enough.
Portuguese family.
My grandparents came over both from Ireland and Portugal and met here and made for a difficult existence because sometimes the Portuguese and the Irish, they don't exactly think much of each other until they get to know individuals.
Well, I imagine they have different stomachs at Christmas dinner.
Well, my father being Irish and my mother cooking, for some reason my father was tyrannical enough of saying we are to eat meat and potatoes. So it really didn't come down to, linguiça and chorizo and all that. That wasn't a part of our tradition.
So chicken Mozambique was not the Christmas dinner?
No. You went to the A&P, and my dad would talk to the Irish butcher and get, Salisbury steak, which was a glorified hamburger, and everything was done on potatoes because potatoes they were very cheap in terms of feeding a family of 6. And then, of course, it was party night, and it was a block of dates. Someone that came over from Portugal, and that was supposed to be sweets. So you had that instead of candy.
But Christmas dinner wasn't Salisbury steak, was it? You didn't have a roast or something like that?
Yeah, it was turkey.
Turkey, okay.
You know, it's a situation in which I look at Christmas from the point of view of, as a child, as an adult. In my adulthood, it's always been a different Christmas than someone who would have children or a wife to share it with. And my definition of a good Christmas is when I can sit back and see people give to me more than just gifts. You can just see the gift of faith. And you would like to think that maybe you were part of nurturing that faith, but you know that you're in a long line of people and you stand, you know, as Newton said, shoulders of giants. And you're passing something on just as parents are passing something on to their children.
So you grew up in the late 50s, early 60s?
Yeah. I was born in 1950. 2 weeks shy of 1951, I would feel a lot younger if I was born in 51. And he then could say, well, I'm not that much younger than Father.
So you must have had a recent birthday.
Yeah.
Christmas time birthday. So in the late 50s, early 60s, what was New Bedford like at Christmas time? Were there all the lights you have now? A lot of religious ceremonies?
Yeah, I would say that, unfortunately, New Bedford was a divided city in terms of ethnicities. So when you say, what was Christmas like, there were people who were coming over here and their grandparents brought over traditions, and there was a kind of insularity, so that you would think of this person was Polish, this person was Portuguese, this person was French, this person was German. So when you met someone and you come up to your parents and you say, hey, I just met so-and-so, all your father wanted to know was the last name. Because New Bedford was a very ethnocentric city.
It reminds me, in Dorchester they would say, what parish?
Yeah.
Right. So in New Bedford they might say what parish, and then they would know your ethnicity once you said the parish.
But does it get any better? And when people come up to me when I don't have the Roman collar on, and I'm often seen at a local coffee shop, I won't mention the name unless I get a free cup of coffee in return, but they know that I'm a priest and it's my time off, and the first thing they say is, what's your name and where you're from? And I said to myself, I am Joseph and I am from Nazareth. Because first of all, when you say New Bedford, they figure you're working class. And then, you know, the idea of what's your name is they want to tell someone that they talk to someone, and this is what the name is. It's like Moses. What name am I going to give when someone asks? So I find that sometimes people say, well, where did you live means a lot. And when they start jumping to conclusions, and I'm not putting down people who, well, I'll say if you live from some of the wealthy suburban areas, immediately a wealthy suburban person perks up and they think you've done better in MCAS and perhaps you're kind of a better person because you have more things. And then I'm saying I have a lot more things than I did when I was growing up. And I'll tell you one thing, the greatest thing that I have is given to me, and other people have treasures and they can pass it on to their children. For some reason, that gift that I identified with myself was the gift of faith. My name is not Faith Harrington, but I do feel that that was something in which my family had a great respect for the religion, and I certainly did become a priest to please them.
Was Midnight Mass and the Christmas, the Advent services, were they elaborate back then?
I don't even remember Advent, to be honest with you. I don't think it was such a big deal back then. And I think the whole situation is we were so focused on your daily task that if you went to church, whether it was one season or another, you know, you wouldn't notice the color of the vestment, and the wreath was no big deal. So I think that I judged things in terms of being in prison. So the fact is, every time I had a school vacation, that was release. You know, and, when you're in the classroom, it was all discipline, which always was my bad posture. You sit, you don't move, and I try to be an altar boy and two brothers were altar boys, but they said, you can't be an altar boy because of your Latin. They were being kind. It was because I couldn't shut up and I couldn't sit still. Some people say that's why I became a priest.
So, Father, you still have midnight mass at St. Francis of Assisi over in the West End, but some of the churches have gone away from that.
And I think that's sad.
Why do you continue it?
I think the main thing is that when you look at what Christmas is to people, it's them looking back. And I think that the happier times in their life should be something that they associate with church. And for many of them, they tell me, well, they remember the first time that they were able to stay up that late. So that's a silly reason to go, but it was also to extend through the whole night a sense of anticipation. Just like sometimes you're allowed to open a gift before Christmas Eve. It was this thing about, well, it may not be Christmas Day, but it's a part of a tradition. And it's mostly the older people that go, and then, of course, the older people don't want to stay up that late. And the young people, well, I think that their lives have become not such that they're any bad or good. It's what do they really feel they need? And I don't think at this time they feel they need things like a midnight mass.
Yeah. I remember the first time I went to midnight mass, I thought, oh, at the stroke of midnight, Jesus is going to be here. It seemed like it was a magical thing to it. And if I remember correctly, because I will acknowledge I'm probably not practicing Catholic now, but they lit the candles so the church could light up. Right. They still do that? Light the candles?
It's a situation where midnight mass in our parish has everything to do with the choir. They practice for over a month. In fact, they have parishioners who are seasonal members of the choir because the choir is growing older and they have a few young people that come and it complements the voices. There's not many men voices, etc. So I really think the highlight for the choir is 11:30 because that's when they have a concert before the midnight. And I said once, I think it should be videotaped and then be passed around and everyone could be told, look, this is what you're missing. And it's not a showy thing. It just is something in which it was part of their tradition. And I'm in an Italian-American church. And as you know, there's not that many Italian-Americans now that moved out. But they really cherish the Midnight Mass. And they'll do an Italian Christmas song and things like that. Even though you look about and you say, wow, there are no Italians there. The faith has been passed on. So that when they say St. Francis of Assisi, some of the older people say, oh, that's the Italian church. But everyone knows it's the West End church.
Yeah.
And it's a small church. And some of the large churches, and I grew up when St. Julie's was not around, and it's a new parish. And so really, you went to the Irish parish, which was St. Lawrence. Then if you were French, you went to Sacred Heart. If you were Portuguese, you went to St. John the Baptist. And they were all small churches that have closed that you can name, Holy Rosary, and you can go on and on. But the concept was you didn't have an automobile. There was a real strict, if you didn't go to church on Sunday, that was it. And so the thing is that they had a trolley, and that was the only way they could get from point A to point B. And that's why there were so many different places for churches.
Do you remember the trolley in New Bedford?
No.
Not that old.
Not that old.
Father, one other thing I thought we could talk about was the historical Christmas. Because, we have these documentaries that you see now, and people have different ideas about the historical Christmas. I know you have an advanced degree in theology. Are you able to talk a little bit about the historical Christmas, the first Christmas?
Well, I'll let you start because you're, 2-3 years younger than me, so you have the same history as I do.
I do. It didn't take as well with me.
Actually, I think that when people say, was Jesus born on December 25th, kind of reminds me of when people call and they say, what time's your midnight mass? And I say, sometime between 11:59 p.m. and 12:01 p.m. So when they say, what exact year was Jesus? Well, they base that on some kind of theory about the stars and earthquakes and things that would be markers of time, but the main markers were the emperor, and that's why you have born in such and such a year. And all the infancy narratives, there are two of them, Matthew and Luke. Matthew was for the Jewish people. Luke was for the whole world. So
Matthew the Gospel.
Yeah, and the Matthew Gospel is you start with Abraham, with Luke, you go right back to Adam. But with Luke, all of a sudden you have words describing Jesus that would be used for Caesar. Wonder child and all this. And, you know, when you had an emperor, there had to be a star that would be there to prove that a person was the emperor. So that was all based upon astrological predictions.
And Matthew and Luke, they both have Jesus being born in a stable in a manger, but John doesn't mention the nativity at all.
No.
And what Mark doesn't either.
No. Mark states that, well, it's kind of too much for me to go into. Mark was the very first written of the Gospels, and it's very condensed. And then what happened was you have one that's very, Jesus is the Son of Man, which of course is that when the missionary command was given, it was you go from Jerusalem to Judea to Samaria. So the fact is, to begin with, the people would ask, is this Jesus? And then they would say, well, here's the Hebrew Scriptures or the Old Testament, and here's how he fulfills all the prophecies related to him being the Messiah.
Then when you go to the Old Testament.
Exactly. Then when you get into Luke, it's the idea of being more the second person of the Blessed Trinity, more the idea of being the Son of God as opposed to the Son of Man. And that's the emphasis.
And it's always been fascinating to me that you have, when did the wise men arise? I remember my mother teaching me when I was a kid that January 6th was Little Christmas, is what she called it. She said, oh yeah, well, that's when the wise men arrived. And in fact, Orthodox have traditionally celebrated Christmas in January. Is that accurate?
In fact, some Latin cultures as well. One of the things that Jack and I have often talked about, and I've mentioned that on my gravestone, they will have these two words, I digress. So let me digress.
Father is good at digressing.
This whole Epiphany thing, significant, is that the time in which Israel had a significant king was Solomon. And so this was a recognition of someone who would be a successor to David. So in order to please a king, you would bring the finest gifts. And this is something where you say, well, did it or did it not occur? Well, in order to make people understand how great Jesus was, you have to talk about stars and earthquakes and things that would be occurring.
East.
Yeah, the whole thing is this is what occurred when a great emperor was born. Well, that's not what Jesus was all about. And Jesus did not fulfill all the prophecies of being the Messiah. If anything, he fulfilled another prophecy, which was to be the suffering servant. Because to the Jewish people of the day, they say, this is your king, and he suffered such, the way he did, and, that was just too much for them. And then when you went beyond that, which Luke does, then the whole thing is, how can you believe that Jesus rose from the dead? Because you're talking now philosophy and logic. So what was a scandal to the Jewish people was his ignominious death. By the way, no one died that way. Everyone died in another way of execution. So, it was just something that was so contrary to what the Jewish people were expecting of the Messiah.
Does the three wise men story illustrate that Jesus was for all races and all peoples, from the East, from the West, from Africa, from Asia?
The thing is Israel has always been sort of cast aside in terms of being the center of the world. But at the time in which Solomon was rich, then it was recognized as something that was an entity. Other than that, it's always been a part of some other great, the Babylonians, the Persians, that whole Syrians and all that. They were always conquered, and they're in a strategic location. And then to be able to say, we have our own king, that was a great moment. And then, of course, with that came the respect that they longed for. And they basically were saying, you know, if we have a Messiah, the Messiah was going to bring us back to the days of David and Solomon, which we would be considered people who would have a Savior or a Lord, etc. Because what was happening is there was so many pagan gods that they had to say, we have one God, and Jesus points to that in his life. And the whole thing is monotheism goes Abraham, you know, and the three great monotheistic religions are, you know, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. And the concept of one God is really something that is the most significant moment in history in terms of understanding of who God was, or who God is, or who God will be.
So one God, is that a big message of the Nativity?
The concept, I think, of monotheism is primarily that we don't have to turn elsewhere in order to find our meaning in life. And in our own day, there's a lot of crypto going on. When I say crypto, it means people who are basically saying, I'm a Christian, when that isn't really what they are, but they've been stamped by birth with this, and they haven't really claimed it for themselves. So people say, well, I was raised Catholic. You know, you raised chickens, you know, raised Catholic. Well, that's born Catholic, baptized. And sadly, sometimes it doesn't even go that far now. People aren't having their children baptized. So the concept of being stamped means that from the very beginning, we are destined to something that's greater than anything we could imagine. That's why we look off to the stars, things that are greater than ourselves. So when one says, this is the sum all of being and all this, then you say, well, I want something, then you turn to God. So, you know, it's things in which you have different gods for different things that you want.
I want to go back to the wise men.
All right.
the
Wise guy, you.
It's my show. The Greek populations and the Lebanese populations in New Bedford, are they celebrating the Epiphany as their Christmas?
They have different traditions. I will keep it on that whole Epiphany thing because for a couple of decades I directed Spanish apostolates in Bedford and in Taunton, Attleboro. They're the happiest days. You know, always, you know, when you're in your 20s and 30s and 40s, that's when you really, they minister to you. And they would always celebrate it on the Epiphany. And I worked closely with the young people. And so we would have clothes, we would have toys, and they were all leftover clothes and leftover toys, which people had collected. And then I would go and they would give it. There was a very nice lady who ran a very fancy clothing shop. She was Jewish, and she knew those kids were never wear clothes that were of high quality. So she'd say, oh, come down to the store. I was able to, and then a year down the road, 2 years, the thing would barely fit, but you knew that this person knew that these children needed it, that these children are going to celebrate Christmas January 6th, and that is something, when I say that, I mean the aspect of celebrating it in one way. They celebrate Epiphany, they celebrate Christmas, and it was just a joy to have two Christmas, you know, during that period of time. To be able to go home, celebrate Christmas with my own family, and then be able to say, well, you know, I can celebrate Christmas with people who are kind of cast aside. And one of the happiest Christmas I had was my religious education children. They were in Spanish, and one was a group from Guatemala, the other one was a group from Puerto Rico, which please keep in your prayers, Puerto Rico. And what happens is the Guatemalan children were using popsicle sticks, and they were teaching the Puerto Ricans how to make the stable. And it was just beautiful, the way all of a sudden Christmas from two different traditions were coming together. And the kids that were a little bit, because when they're young, they stick together with their family. And suddenly you have the Epiphany, that separates them from the Anglos, and then you have a tradition which is different, and they're able to come together. So years down the road, you see these Puerto Ricans who are using popsicle sticks, and they're making that for their nativity scene, and that's what I think is great. And when we get into all the polarization that we're in today, in which I won't go into because the bishop might call me. No, it's just too controversial. As I said, I'm not going to talk about politics. Didn't I start that with Jack?
Yeah.
So, this kind of country has never been so polarized in my lifetime. And I'm saying Christmas is something that, in my experience, brought parishes together. And I was pastor of St. Hedwig's, which was a Polish parish in the South End, and the Waste was Senora de Guadalupe, which we now call Our Lady of Guadalupe. And all of a sudden you have the Polish people and the Latin people, what we call them Hispanics, and the Polish people coming together in the church basement, and they're sharing their traditions. It doesn't get any better than that, Jack.
Pumpkins and salsa.
Absolutely. and it's sharing meals, and all of a sudden, people who would say, the Hispanics are taking over St. Hedwig's, or, all these stereotypes between the Polish, it all went because of traditions. And all of a sudden you say, well, this is the way Polish people celebrate Christmas. They take an interest, and then vice versa, because it's like a neutral zone.
Sure.
And I just think that's what, people say, what does Christmas mean to you? In New Bedford, it was one thing where it was growing up, you were rich or poor, you were this nationality or that nationality, and you went to a situation, as you said, are you a member of this parish, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that's kind of one of the things that when people say the good old days, there are a lot of things that were not the good old days there. And we, through nostalgia, we make that, we forget about this, and we make all those Christmas great. There are things that are going on now that, standard times, thinking about all the people, the neediest. That, I don't know how many years that's been done, but that is something that the city can be proud of.
Yeah, I like nothing better than to read those neediest families' stories, because when I read them, it reminds me of my own small life.
Right.
There are many, many people right here in this city who have circumstances a lot tougher than I do. And I'll never forget one story. I think it was last year. I think it was written by our sports reporter, Brendan.
Right.
He went into an apartment, and there was literally no furniture, no food, no clothing. It was just bare with a mattress and very few other things. And you don't think of people in circumstances like that, but right here in the city, but there are.
Because it's such a small parish, I won't go into details, but I'm involved with decorating this morning. And for two of those women, it'll be their first Christmas without their beloved husband, So, their families are coming together to support them, but to know that you were there when they were sick, you were there beyond the funeral, you established a relationship, and your heart is saddened because you know that person, it's the first time they're not with their child, grandchildren, and there's this thing that kind of hovers over their Christmas, but to know that you are a part of alleviating some of that, or at least ameliorating it, it's a great feeling. So
I have one final question to wrap up, and this is not meant to be political, but it's just meant to acknowledge the circumstances that we're all in now. Most people would describe this as a secular era. People don't go to church as much as they used to. In the media, there isn't nearly as much religious focus on Christmas as there was even when I was growing up, which is the same era as yourself. How do you bring forth your message in the secular era? What are the challenges to doing that? What secrets to your success?
When I hear the word challenge, it's kind of a dressy word for problem. We don't say problem anymore, we say a challenge. And I think that's one of the things is we need to confront it and not minimize it or rationalize it in any way and say, listen, this is something that's wrong. And I think that involves the worship of the dollar bill. And you just have to say, if you say that we're a wonderful country because our stock market is, going way to the top. Well, that's one way of being wonderful. And then when you take your eye off that, then you see another world. And then you say, well, all these people who are saying, well, my 401k is all this and that. You have to say, okay, who do you trust? Now, if you trust money, then the last year has been a great year. Now, if you trust something that should be cherished more than money, then you look at what has happened. Las Vegas, Puerto Rico, Virgin Islands, Florida, Texas. And then you say, is this a wonderful year? And I think if you're very money-oriented, then you separate yourself from people. And you need to be confronted for that, because that's the problem. And if you're hurting and you realize that Christmas is something that you can get through because you have faith, then that perhaps gets back to the question of who do you trust? And very quickly, I have a good friend in Puerto Rico, and he has to go to a mall so he can get to a phone to call me. And he did call me for my birthday. And, the one thing that he said was all those brats, he's referring to the youngsters, he says they put those darn things away, the phones, and he says they're learning to get to know their grandparents, people who should be teaching in the school, but they can't get through all those hoops. They're picking up a book, not a device, and they're teaching their children because they don't want to see them lose a year of schooling. And then the idea of suddenly all the people who were in need but didn't cry out for need, you're not walking by them anymore. You're seeing them. So he's looking at this as a blessing. And I say, hey, this person's a friend. He's a person of great faith. But to begin with, he was someone who loved his family. And I shouldn't say this, or I shouldn't say this. It sounds like, he says, I'm taking names. I've almost said his name. I said, how can you take names? That's not right, because he's taking names of everyone that's leaving Puerto Rico at their moment of need. But I know him, a day or two, he'll forgive those people. But, this is the kind of pride. And I know when he went by the Vietnam War, because he served the country for 12 years, and he said, look at that wall. See the names of people from Puerto Rico. They didn't want to be there, some of them. They were drafted. And we're America. And, they just look at it from the point of view of we're now thrown aside because we're not on the front page anymore. But when you don't have power, you don't know what you miss. Waiting in line for diesel so you can get your generators. And he's so grateful now because he doesn't have to wait that long in line. And he's saying, I'm so happy to hear that you're having a wonderful Christmas. I'm saying, wow, I don't know if I would be that noble. But he so much loves his family, and he's seeing his family get through things. And I think that when we talk about, being poor and things like that, and that I'll be as happy as Christmas, what I did was I sent him a email, and I hope that it'll arrive, and I don't know when he'll get his power back. And it's Bacheli, which is his favorite singer, and it's in Spanish, Jesus Christ, And the thing is, to them, when they hear Santa Claus is coming to town, to them it's Jesus Christ. And it's just a wonderful thing because they can reach out to everybody with that joy of being a child. Now, I'm not telling you to, Google Bacheli and, Santa Claus is coming to town. But you say, wow, just to be able to think that when he turns on that computer, goes to that phone, and that's going to be the first thing he hears, is he's going to open that email, and it's going to know those children, Bacheli, they had a Christmas, and it just touches me that he can't say Merry Christmas to me. And I just hope that there's a lot of people out there who say, I've had some very, very difficult Christmas, but those are the Christmas in which we've grown closer to each other, and we really understand the Christmas spirit because we're not distracted by material things. So, I sound like the whole Charlie Brown, the materialism, but when you start hearing about, Black Thursday and all that, Cyber Monday and all this, so they want to clean out the inventory to see what really sells, so then they can sell more during the Christmas season, And, I look at this and I say, what other country in the world would do this to Christmas? They don't. So there's something about us that, needs to be confronted.
So there you go. That's a nice Christmas message from Father Kevin Harrington of St. Francis of Assisi Parish in the West End of New Bedford. There are other things to think about at Christmas besides Black Friday and Cyber Monday, and some of them might be the people in Puerto Rico, some of whom are in New Bedford now because of the terrible conditions there. So thank you, Father, for coming on and trusting me not to talk about politics. And
Well, it's your show.
Merry Christmas, everyone.
Feliz Navidad and Merry Christmas.